Accuracy in Academia does these author nights for Capitol Hill interns because, well, we see the speakers you get, and we figured whatever opinion you come out with, you deserve the information on the other side. And that seems to be wanting from what we've seen coming out of academia. I should mention, by the way, these are brought to us by a generous grant from the Frank A. and Nettie Galletti Fusco Foundation, for which we are most grateful. But I was just writing about this, and one problem you have talking to journalists is that the main thing we're interested in is the last thing we wrote about. And I'm a journalist, but try to be. At any rate, two things that academics have weighed in on, and one thing they created, the Arab Spring and Obamacare. Both came about for the same reason. They basically talked to each other and came up with their theories about what's happening or what should be done. In both cases, they ignored primary sources. In Obamacare, doctors, nurses, EMTs, for that matter, patients. In the case of the Arab Spring, they could have actually talked to people from the country, from the region, who've spent some time in the region, to get a better handle on what is happening. At both Accuracy in Media and Accuracy in Academia, we try very hard to go to primary sources. It's one reason we stay here. The Library of Congress is right behind us. We can go to original hearings rather than read what is said about them in books, which is often inaccurate. I might add, third element, I'm coming down the home stretch. Third element is, I'm afraid there is the tendency, especially when you don't consult primary sources, to kind of superimpose your idea of what is happening. And this happens a lot when there are revolutions abroad. I was struck by the fact that what the elites did with the so-called Arab Spring revolutions is very similar to what happened in my wife's homeland of Zimbabwe 32 years ago, where elites judged that Robert Mugabe, who later racked up 1 million+ casualties, was some kind of Jesuitically trained philosopher king. They're always looking for philosopher kings. At any rate, I got quite an education from both the great Nani Darwish and from our speaker today, who I first was privileged to hear on a panel at the National Press Club 2 years ago, and wanted to bring her here tonight. She's the author of a political novel that I hope to read the translation of someday, to share her insights, experience, strength, and hope. We are proud to have with us Cynthia Farahat.
Thank you all for having me. Anyways, I'm glad I'm here. And thank you so much, Mel. And thank you, Spencer, for organizing this. It's an honor to be with you. And actually, we met about a year and 3 months ago. Not really 2 years, because I've been here in America for 18 months. I was born and lived all my life in Egypt, and when I arrived here to live permanently, almost in exile, almost kicked out from Egypt, I was not even sure where I was going to spend the night upon my arrival to America after traveling for 25 hours. So I'm glad I'm finally here. America is a little better than a third world military prison. I think we can agree. So I'm glad, very glad that I'm here. And thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your work, Mel, for accuracy in the media, because I have seen what happens when there's inaccuracy in the media, and it's just tyranny and dictatorship. That is what happens. I wrote my political novel Cognac in 2010 in Egypt, but I could not publish it under Mubarak's regime because it has a lot of facts about the three power players that were battling over power, it had a lot of facts, and it was almost prophetic, but not because I'm psychic, but because I understand cause and effect. And I was worried that if I publish it and discuss all the details and what was going to happen, what is inevitable to happen, I would have been tried for treason or espionage or something like that. Crazy, because that's what they do to political activists and dissidents in my country. Actually, Cognac is a romantic political novel, and I also it was supposed to be published last month in Cairo, but because of the political turmoil and also my publisher backed out of fear of going to prison for blasphemy, which is usually the case. I published a book in Egypt, co-authored a book in Egypt that was banned by Azhar University in 2008 because it discussed Egypt's blasphemy laws. So my publisher backed out, so we were going to have to wait till next fall to publish it, but we will definitely will. And then at the same time, we'll get it translated to English, so hopefully you would be interested to buy it and read it. I chose to call it Cognac for several reasons, not only because Cognac's nature as a drink in terms of its complexity and richness and acquired taste is similar to the attributes of Samantha, the main character in my novel, but also because like Cognac, her passion, love, rationality, and mere existence were forbidden and incriminated by blasphemy and many laws in Egypt. I will discuss two main incidents that happened to her that would give you a glimpse to the actual lives of millions of women and children that lives under Sharia law, which is Islamic jurisprudence. Samantha was born and grew up in Egypt under Mubarak's socialist constitutional theocracy. The first incident that I'm going to discuss that she encounters in the novel was when she was about 6 years old. She grew up with a loving mother and a very violent and abusive father. And when her mother sought the help of the police officer told her, how do we know that you're not a disobedient wife who deserves to be beaten up and punished? Because, as some of you might know, wife beating is legal in Egypt and under Islamic law. So her mother replied by saying, but he is going to murder me and my children. And he told her with a reckless smirk on his face, well, we might look into it when he does. So that was the first incident that had an impact on her perception afterwards. And that point, Samantha realized that her enemies were both domestic and foreign. And she and her family were not only targeted by the beast in their house, but by a more dangerous one outside, which was her own government. Samantha, as a child, was not scared of the dark. She was scared of the light. She didn't fear what she didn't know. She feared what she knew. That perception was later attributed in her life to courage. But it was actually her rational understanding and risk assessment that reality and its consequences were far more horrific than any other scenario. Samantha and her family later escaped the father, who was a charismatic narcissist and a descendant of an old Egyptian aristocracy who had friends in high places, and she saw the aspects of Egyptian police state very early on, with her father's ability to track them down every time they escaped for decades. The second turning point in her life happened when she was 17, and that is actually autobiographical. That is literally the next point I'm going to tell you is what happened to me personally. She was an artist since she was 4 years old. She dreamt of being able to study art, which was illegal under Sharia law, where the government decides what college you should go to. True story. The government in Egypt decides for every single citizen which college they should go to and what they should study. So if you were an artist like Sam or I, the government intentionally assigned us to be to study something complete opposite of art, which is Sharia law, Islamic law. If you are an Islamist who thinks that sculpture is idol worshipping, they send you to art school. And that explains why there's a lot of broken sculptures in the Faculty of Fine Arts in Egypt today. And if you were a scientist or wanted to be a physicist, they assigned you to study literature in college. And if you were a poet, they sent you to medical school or to be an engineer. That's literally what the government in Egypt has been doing for decades. She was so desperate that she thought that the more she tried to prove that she was worthy of studying art, the more impossible it got. I actually imitated a painting or a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, which was titled Man in Armor. And the more I got better, the more impossible it was for me to go to art school. And so that's usually, how it happens when you're a teenager in Egypt and you're trying to determine what you're going to do with your life. It was absolutely baffling as a girl growing up at 17 years old why the government would do something like that. But then I decided to study law school. After I decided not to go to their law school, but I also decided to study the Egyptian religious law to understand the motivations behind their tyranny. But of course, I studied Islamic law from genuine Islamic sources for 12 years, and not the government-run propaganda soul-crushing machines they call universities. And that's when her life's quest changed from art into just trying to change the system that destroyed her existence, that attempted to destroy her existence. I realized at a very young age that it was premeditated, usually very successful strategy to strip citizens of their identity, individuality, and sovereignty, to determine their own future, to teach us that there is no such thing as autonomy or self-governance, and that is your recipe for a tyrannical third world country. It's not because America is rich, Egypt is poor. It's because it's a wasteland of resources. Just everything there goes to die. The French call Cognac eau de vie, water of life, and like water of life is banned in Egypt, any form of life or exercising of liberty is banned in Egypt. I hope this explains a little bit why young people in Egypt leave their homes with their handwritten wills in their pockets. Girls and young men like yourselves leave their homes with their handwritten wills before they go out. Because, like Samantha and myself, they grew to understand that fighting or even dying for freedom is less painful than enduring tyranny. That submission is so much more dangerous than rebellion, and that slavery and sanction is worse than death. And that realization is your recipe for liberty. Egypt is currently on a national strike. And when I met a group of people, like-minded people in Egypt a decade ago, we attempted to found the first capitalist pro-West secular political party in the history of modern Egypt. That was, of course, barred by 2 court orders under Mubarak's regime. But right now, there are millions of vigilant, non-violent, sleepless rebels against tyranny on the streets of Egypt right now as we speak. In the past 30 days, 7 million people signed a document with their personal ID to demand an early presidential election on June 30th to annul the Muslim Brotherhood, illegitimate presidency, and retention of power. In only 30 days, the movement called Rebellion was able to gather more signature than the alleged number of voters for the alleged president of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi. Imagine 30 days, 7 million signatures with their IDs, handwritten signatures. The military regime that held the presidential elections and killed people protesting for religious freedom on October 11th in front of TV cameras, including a friend of mine, Michael Mossad, did not hold free and fair elections. There aren't enough Gaddafi try to pronounce it. Hallucinogens, you know what I mean, on the planet Earth to convince me that the regime that doesn't respect people's lives would respect their votes. There are not enough drugs that, Gaddafi talked about that can convince me it was something like that. There was no elections in Egypt. It was all fake. It was a charade for the international community. The novel ends with Samantha's victory over her adversaries in the regime. She was able to stay alive and morally consistent as they tried to subjugate her with numerous threats and 24-hour surveillance all her adult life. She was the one. She ended up being the one who conquered those who monitored her with her logic and passion, which is actually inspired by an interesting little fact that I got to know a few years before I left Egypt, that the regime used to change the people that monitored us every 2 to 3 weeks, monitored me and my group, because the people that listened in on our conversations, the political conversations, used to be turned to our side. Isn't that awesome? Is that that's how far they had to go? They paid a lot of money because people were turning to our side while they were monitoring us. And that actually got me to reach the realization in the end of the novel that the only current superpower in the world right now is the individual, and that is why I'm alive here today and in America. For this only reason is because I refuse to let them compromise my moral consistency. It was the only thing that kept me alive, is to hold on to that. And I hope I didn't bore you, and please go ahead and ask anything you want.
By the way, she's also a gifted sculptor. Questions?
Yes.
You categorized, or you said something about universities saying that they're like soul-crushing institutions. Would you categorize even Al-Azhar as being, it's like the oldest center of knowledge, arguably, in the Middle East. Would you say that Al-Azhar is the center of that soul-crushing?
No. The government-run universities are the soul-crushing propaganda machines. Al-Azhar is the institution responsible for 90% of terrorism on planet Earth. I studied what students in Al-Azhar study, and I studied everything that they study. I have these books in my house, thousands of them, and I read thousands and thousands of pages daily over 12 years to try to prove myself wrong, and unfortunately I wasn't. But so it is not just soul-crushing. I hold it responsible for a lot of war crimes that happened around the planet, in Pakistan, that happened in Algeria. I know some Algerian politicians that hold Al-Azhar full responsibility for the civil war over there. and it's a terrorist institution.
Just kind of like looking at the situation through my own eyes, as just like homegrown American. Like, I just want to know your opinion on I know you've had your spats with the Mubarak appointed judges, but do you feel that they've kind of stopped the Muslim Brotherhood and from Morsi from taking even more power?
There were a number of judges that were not associated with Mubarak and actually were dissidents to just have a free judiciary system that is not run by the government. And these are the same ones who were dissidents at the time of Mubarak that are now against the Muslim Brotherhood. So there are great people doing great things in Egypt, and we've got plenty of good judges.
Oh, sorry. So you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood basically just stole the election blatantly from the will of the people. Over here in America, the story was not entirely convincing, but it was relatively convincing, from the media that it's as good as a third, second world kind of country's election is going to get, and Morsi is the due leader. How did they prosecute such an incredible fraud?
I'll tell you, because the Supreme Council of Armed Forces that was overseeing the elections at the time was also responsible for the electoral committee that picked up who should run and who shouldn't run. And it was run by the former judge in military court. So he was directly affiliated with the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. So there were plenty of intelligent, professional, secular men that were planning to run for presidency, but they were not allowed for very strange reasons. And they only allowed people that they know that they can have control over. The Muslim Brotherhood were installed, they were not elected, by the help of the international community and President Obama's administration and the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. They were actually, come to think of it, in 2011, the number of people that joined the Muslim Brotherhood, that actually in 80 years, from 600 to 800,000 members. You're talking less than 1 million in 80 years. That's all what they were able to recruit from 95 million people. So less than 1 million. They did not have a lot of leverage. There was a democratic bloc that was formed by several secular parties that had millions of followers. But this administration refused to open any kind of talks with them and supported the Islamist radical minority that were shunned by Egyptian protesters and the Egyptian masses. So the elections were definitely, certainly stolen.
Go ahead. Hi, Cynthia. I'm Frank Spano with the Investigative Project on Terrorism.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise, thank you for being here tonight. Looking at the administration, you mentioned the Obama administration, looking at the active steps that organizations like the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the administration itself have taken to distance terrorism from Islamic fundamentalism and from radical Islam. How do you see, with an administration that's continuously trying to separate those two and continuously trying to accept the Muslim Brotherhood as anything but a terrorist organization, as a legitimate government, how do you see U.S. and Egyptian relations moving forward? Is there a solution from your perspective?
There is definitely a solution, but this administration only defines the Muslim Brotherhood as allies. I'm not an ally according to President Obama's administration. I've been suffering since I came here to get my papers. If I was a Somalian jihadist, I would have had a better chance of getting my asylum. The Boston bombers, it's not a coincidence. They both have political asylum and I don't. Of course, their definition of an ally are the radical Islamists, the founders of Al-Qaeda. That, of course, creates a problem between actual Egyptians and the United States government. There has been hundreds of protests against President Obama's foreign policy and his support of terrorists in Egypt. And there has been hundreds of protests against the funding and the military aid to Egypt that is used to kill young men and women protesting for freedom and religious rights and even sexual rights. That's where it's very advanced, but you don't get this on the media.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, could you describe daily life and compare it today under the Muslim Brotherhood versus how it was under Mubarak? Just the level of tyranny or fear that people might live under.
Actually, it's better in ways and it's worse in so many other ways. It's better because right now there is a very popular movement against Islamism and against Islamists. There are places in Egypt that Islamists cannot walk, but a woman that is not veiled can. So right now they are the most hated group. So socially it is better for women and children, but it is not as safe. It's much more dangerous because the Muslim Brotherhood has said that they are going to wage war against women who go out and protest in Tahrir Square, and they have assaulted several ones and hacked at them with swords and knives in the protests. We have over 40 women that has been assaulted, and one of them sexually assaulted with a knife by members of the Muslim Brotherhood. So, of course, it is terrible for women and children and non-Muslims, but it is usually backed by the state and is not happening from just regular Egyptians.
Question.
Yes.
Just how much of a free market, if any, is there in Egypt?
Egypt is a socialist country. We have one of the biggest bureaucracies on planet Earth. It's literally just clear socialism. If you have over 7 million employees only in the executive branch, that explains why they were able to get to change the people spying on us every 3 weeks. Where did they get all these people for years? It's incredible the amount of people they have working for the government. So that sort of big government, it's huge. Of course, is socialism. There's absolutely no free market in Egypt at all. And it's sort of a mob rule. For you to be able to open a little store, just a little grocery store, a corner shop, you would have to pay bribes that would be incredibly, just, maybe triple the amount of investment you're going to put in the store. So it's corrupt, no free market, zero free market. And that has been one of the things that baffle me when I hear it on U.S. media, is that Mubarak was pro-free market. It's just, it's like saying that Castro was pro-free market. Exactly, literally, that's the policy they were implementing.
How extensive is the black market?
Oh, the black market? We cannot survive without the black markets right now. No one can. That is that is the parallel economy, is the black market. Everything and anything is done through the black market, even people who work for the government. I know president of one of the biggest banks in Egypt, and he has to go buy the dollar from the black market because he cannot find it any otherwise. And so it's just an absolute mess.
As bad as things are right now, how do you foresee the future? Do you feel like there's hope, or do you feel like, there's too much work to be done? How do we gauge you on how you feel?
It's both. I'm very hopeful on a level and very, very disappointed on a different level. I'm very hopeful because right now there is a very strong awareness to who's an ally and who's an enemy, and most Egyptians articulate their ideas so much better, and now they only want freedom, they want prosperity, they're clear about what they want. They might disagree on how to get there, but what they agree upon is that they definitely do not want a theocracy, they do not want to be ruled by Islamists, and they do not want big government. And that is something that is beyond my wildest dreams. I never thought that I would live to see that day. In 2003, I said maybe we would see something like that in about 200 to 500 years. But it happened, and it's not, you cannot stop it when there are 7 million people that signed that they will protest on the 30th of June against Islamism. That is huge. That is big. The part that saddens me very much is that the current administration has given the Islamist regime 12 F-16 fighter jets only this year. And what are these fighter jets going to be used for? It's going to be used against people like you and me. That's what they're going to be used for. So that is, of course, one of the worst things that ever happened. And especially, I'm going to publish an article next week on Front Page Magazine discussing the Muslim Brotherhood's role in Benghazi. I have a video where a terrorist, what were Egyptian terrorists doing in Benghazi and in front of the consulate or the compound, the American compound. The second thing, I have a video where a man says, don't shoot, Dr. Morsi sent us. And I'm going to be, I have the translation and the video, and it's all going to be published in Front Page Magazine. So not only didn't this administration investigate what happened in Libya, they overlooked what happened from the Muslim Brotherhood and their involvement. They overlooked the fact that we have a video evidence saying Morsi, and I sent it to the FBI at the time when it happened. No one, of course, got back to me. It's like, it never happened. And it explains why President Obama just 3 days after the 9/11 attack, went out and said Egypt is not an ally. Maybe because he knows that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt were involved, but yet he rewarded them for it, since it did not cost him the elections, so it was no big deal. 4 Americans were killed.
I've heard some claims that the treatment of Egyptian Christians has changed since the change of government. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, there are 2 answers for this question. Yes, first, it changed in terms of the relationship between Muslims and Christians, because Muslims don't fall for the trick anymore that the Christians are the enemy, the Israelis are what's causing our poverty, it's all America's fault that we're poor. That kind of stuff doesn't work anymore. So the social relationships between Muslims and Christians are so much better. But there's also terrible persecution from the government, organized criminal persecution of Christians in the government. And they try to blame everything on them. And it's not working because right now they have a lot of allies among the Muslim population.
What do you see coming out of Israel's involvement with any of this?
Oh, that's a good question, because I was asked before, there was a congressman who was lobbying for military aid to Egypt, and he asked me, will Egypt go to war with Israel? And I told him, with your help they will. When you keep funding and arming and training your enemies, their ideas will eventually fly into your buildings. So, first of all, the aid has to stop for America's national security and for Israel's national security. Second thing is, right now, among a lot of analysts, I've been hearing that, Morsi is doing some great things for Israel and he's closing the tunnels. But what actually Morsi is doing while closing the tunnels is opening the Rafah border between Gaza and Sinai. So what he's doing is he's building Palestinian jihadist terrorist camps in northern Sinai. So you are going to have South Lebanon in northern Sinai. So it is an absolute horrific scenario that no one yet has talked about anywhere in Western media. And they're applauding Morsi for closing the tunnels. And someday we will wish to go back to the days when they were just tunnels.
I know for the Green Revolution in Iran, the internet was a massive kind of enabler of that, and it's like still going on. In terms of internet freedom, freedom of communication in Egypt, I know it was pretty constricted under Mubarak, and I'm assuming it's also pretty constricted under Morsi, but has anything changed in that regard, and the ability to organize, say, protests or anything?
Yes, it's still happening. Although the Muslim Brotherhood, they keep hacking groups and sending death threats and trying to... They hacked numerous of groups that I was personally member on hundreds of groups that they hacked and destroyed. And we keep building more groups and so on. So, and the problem is Facebook in Egypt is managed by state security. And that's not an opinion, it's a fact. When I was in Egypt in 2010 or late 2009, a friend of mine came and he told me, I was abducted last night from under my house because I know you and I work at Facebook. State security literally abducted him because he knows me. And they told him, if you do not sever your relationship with Cynthia, you will lose your job at Facebook. Because his job at Facebook, he just got it, and it was supposed to be spying on me and writing reports and translating everything I say in English to Arabic. So he was abducted, interrogated for 12 hours, and then they let him go. But this proves to you that it's run by the regime, and it was the same under Mubarak, because that happened under Mubarak, and same under Morsi, I mean. But it's still very much effective. That's why the government closed the internet. Imagine a whole country shuts down the internet. It's just amazing that they were able to do that. Yes, Ilan. Hi.
Introduce myself earlier. I'm a guest, not an intern. Ilan Journo, Ayn Rand Institute. The question for you, I'm interested in what living in this kind of society under Mubarak did to people's psychology and their mindset. So we know, to give you the parallel, under the Soviets, it really dehumanized people because their mental processes were, what is allowed, what will I be penalized for, am I being spied on? I'm interested in what life was like and then and now under Egypt's rule.
It's very hard to articulate how it felt like. It's incredibly hard. Imagine at 2 a.m. in the morning, you wake up at night, and I say hello, and on the other side, I hear my own voice speaking to my best friend about boyfriends in my living room. They record a conversation I'm having with my best friend about who's dating who, or why date this guy, not the other, and stuff like that. And they were playing the whole conversation to me to try to terrorize me, to tell me that we are in your bedroom, that we are in your house, we're in your apartment. So, of course, that comes with a lot of trust issues. It comes with a lot of, we're always jumpy. Every time a door knocks, my first reaction is to go hyperventilate. And imagine if even my mother, when I was growing up, she used to hide my diary and my journal where I said what I wrote, what I thought about the political system and life in Egypt, in an iron box with a key under the bed, because she was scared that the cleaning lady was a spy for Egyptian intelligence and secret police. So everything was like that. You don't know who bugs your apartment and how it's bugged. It was just unimaginable, just absolutely unimaginable. And sometimes you're scared to say over the phone that you care about someone so that they would not get hurt. Sometimes I would call my friends who were with me in the political party, and my mother would be standing in front of me, and I'd tell her we're going to play a game now. And I keep telling him that I hate my mother, I hate my family, I hope they just disappear. I want them to die, I hope God kills them. I keep saying that stuff. Of course, he knew that I was bluffing. Of course, my mother knew I was bluffing, but that's what I had to say over the phone to convince them that I don't care about my family, so that they would not know that this is actually my weak point, was my family and their well-being. So it controls every single little detail and aspect of your life. Finally, here in America, I'm starting to be more open and smile at strangers and not scream at them and tell them I'm going to eat the liver and stuff that I did in Egypt. So I'm becoming much nicer now. Yes.
I forgot to introduce myself last time. My name's Kayla. So you gave us this kind of like background about life in Egypt, and I think that the reality is that I've lived in Lebanon and Syria and Egypt. This is the reality for so many people in the Middle East and North Africa. Whether it to be the extent that you described or to their own extent with the mukhabarat, the like secret police everywhere. So, like, what lessons can be learned from Egypt looking into Syria right now, or looking into, like, the future of Lebanon, which arguably is going to be the same kind of thing that's going on? Like, what lessons can other Middle East countries or Northern African countries learn from what happened in Egypt?
I would start with America and the IRS, because that is what secret police does. So, actually, unfortunately, to my horror and disappointment, that I'm starting to get the feelings I used to get from being watched and spied on in Egypt here in the United States of America. So what we should learn here is that if this IRS incident goes and people do not pay for the crimes that and the breach of the rule of law that happened, I'm afraid you are going to have this kind of secret police that spied on me and my best friend in our living room, because that is how exactly it starts. Checking your medical records, the phones of the Associated Press reporters, and it is very sad to see it happen here. As for Syrians and as for Lebanese, they fought these battles in so many different ways before. And I know for a fact that anyone who fought this war will reach the same conclusion as we all reached in Egypt, and various religions, different backgrounds. We all reach the same conclusion, is that freedom is inevitable, and we know that slavery is worse than death, and submission is worse than tyranny. So they will get to that conclusion, and it is not it's unstoppable. Although the current administration is trying to undermine people like me, which are the majority, it's not going to work for long, because Obama is not going to stay in power forever, I hope. I don't know. But there might be hope for people like me with the change in this administration.
Go ahead. Describe the level of influence that you see of the Muslim Brotherhood in this country, front group with the current White House, media. What do you see there?
I see that in 2013, and I never imagined that I would say ever something like that, and I never thought, but actually the Muslim Brotherhood have more influence here than they do in Egypt. In Egypt, Egyptian dissidents burned down the Muslim Brotherhood offices across the country, but right now they have posts in the White House. And I knew that the Muslim Brotherhood was going to come to power the day President Obama assigned a member of the Muslim Brotherhood as his advisor, which is Dalia Mujahid. And the Muslim Brotherhood website in Egypt which I love very much and always read every day. They were celebrating it, but they removed it about a few weeks afterwards. They took it down. They said that they have a member in the administration working for President Obama, and then they took it down immediately. But right now, I have the names of 15 people that are directly members of the Muslim Brotherhood that are working with the administration, and these are the ones we know. These are the public names. So I can only imagine what we don't know. But they are very influential. They are backed by Gulf states, so the Arab blood and conflict oil. They are backed, and unfortunately, corruption and ideological subversion in this country is elevating them here.
What about front groups in the media? Do you see any penetration there?
Oh yes, certainly. They're much more popular there than people like me or from my country that speak the truth. I know my Muslim friends would be described as Islamophobic according to American mainstream media. So, actually most Egyptians right now would be considered Islamophobic by the standards of the mainstream American media. So you can imagine that they lose control in Egypt and they're getting it here. And that's why they're in power in Egypt.
Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself the first time. I'm Shanine from San Antonio, Texas.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. To what would you attribute the rise in popularity of here?
It's different things. It's there's been decades of war against American exceptionalism and against the American Constitution, American values. There has been a lot of infiltration of Soviets since President RDF. So there has been an infiltration of by communist groups. Ideological subversion is obviously very alive and well when you find that the status quo and the acceptable political discourse is pro-terrorism and not the one against it. That's years and decades of ideological subversion and infiltration.
So you basically think the American people are, because the American people tend to be some of the ones who think the Muslim Brotherhood is not all as bad as we understand it to be. So you think that we're basically turning against ourselves in a way?
Yes. It's just suicidal, anti-West, and it's just very bad philosophy going on. Pleasure.
I want to break in for 1 second, not to preclude any questions, but just to pick up on one reference you just made. Our next Authors' Night is in this very room, June 18th. M. Stanton Evans, co-author of Stalin's Secret Agents.
I'm reading the book.
Communist Spies in the Roosevelt White House.
Yes.
You can sign up for it tonight, actually. Go ahead.
Yes. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Shocking stuff in there. And it's all happening right now, but instead of the Stalinists, we've got the Muslim Brotherhood. So.
How do you feel about the push for Sharia law here in America?
It's suicide. If people want to, I don't know. There's absolutely, it's suicide and self-loathing. Any person who does not fight an ideology that wants to annihilate them are suicidal and self-hating. So that's it.
Question following that. Could you discuss the degree to which Nani Darwish makes the point that some parts of the Middle East follow Sharia law more closely than others? Could you discuss the degree to which it was followed under Mubarak versus under Morsi?
Sharia law has been introduced in the Egyptian constitution since 1971, so that's a long time. And we still have the same article, which is the basis of Sharia law are, the basis also of legislation. So it is in a way still the same, but it got a little bit more effective. It's not in a penal system yet. So the hudud, the Islamic penal system with the chopping of hands and limbs from opposite sides and heads and all that stuff, it's not there yet. The stoning and that like we have it in Iran and Saudi Arabia, but it's not going to go there because Egyptians are, as mainstream media would define them now, becoming Islamophobic. So I don't see that happening.
I was wondering, what role do you think telling these kind of stories, like your novel, and films such as what we were talking about, the stoning in Iran, like the stoning of Mr. Right, and those things, what kind of role do you think those can play in educating people about what's going on and the gravity of these issues?
I think it's great because you get to listen from real people and real experiences. And if anyone is just a little empathetic, they put themselves in this person's place, they would be able to realize that America is going to be going on this same path if they do not wake up. So if we were able to do this, if I was able to do it, and I'm just a girl and I don't have a Second Amendment where I come from. I only had a butcher knife that barely worked on chicken. So to protect myself with. So if I could do that with men calling me in the middle of the night, telling me that they want my head in their freezer, I think you can do it here too, before it's too late and before it gets to that point. And the frightening thing is, if an American government goes back or goes a little bit statist or social, it's just not going to be the UK, it's going to be the Soviet Union. So it's a very, very scary thought, and we all have to do something about it. No one has the luxury or can afford to live the way we lived. My pleasure.